Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thank you, virtual audience. Love to have you join us. This is exciting because this is our first live event with Andrews and Wilson, but we have done a virtual event, right?
We did. We did one with us and Don.
That's right. So, anyway, we're really thrilled to have them here, and this is their first book in the Clancyverse, as we like to call it, which is previously written, by not just one person, but the last person who was writing this is Mark Cameron, a really nice guy from Alaska. And he's handed on the franchise. And it's interesting to me that happens. So, what was the process that got you two into the Clancyverse when Mark decided to move in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a lot of serendipity in terms of timing, but the way it almost always works is Tom Colgan, of course, he was Clancy's last editor, as you well know, and he's been editing the series, the Jack Ryan series, and the Jack Ryan Jr. series since. And so I think that this was in his mind for a while, or at least that's what he tells us. We'll see. But we had done other work for Tom, and we've become friends with Tom. We wrote a W.B. Griffin book, Rogue Asset, in the Presidential Agent series. So we'd worked with Tom Colgan. And when Mark decided that he was ready to hang up the Clancy and focus on his own work, Tom Colgan reached out to us and said, "Hey, let's have a drink in New York when you're here." And honestly, I don't think I knew that that's what it was going to be, but we had a spy inside the organization. So Tom, I don't know if Tom's watching, but if you're watching, we knew before drinks because Don Bentley said, "Hey, you know what's going to go on." So honestly, at that time, we were really busy. You and I talked about this before. We were really busy, and there was a little bit of stress of like not just being too busy, but man, you don't want to do a bad job on your hero. Like we grew up reading this, so that was a stressor, and we were like, I don't know. And Brian is a submariner, as some of you know. So when we first sat down, Colgan says, "All right, so look, first thing I want to tell you is if you take this on, your first book will fall on the 40th anniversary for The Hunt for the Red October."
Oh, God, what a
Right.
red flag that was.
Well. For me, it's over flag. It was a white flag of surrender because I watched my submariner best friend and writing partner glaze over, and it's like, well, that's it. And I will say that we have to give a lot of credit to Blackstone because it was an undertaking. We had a lot of commitments there, and we went to Josh Stanton, the CEO there, and said, "Hey, we'd like to do this." And he said, "You tell us how we can help, and we'll support it however we can. We can move things around."
So I am going to hold up. Guess what? This is my advanced reading copy for, and one lucky person will go away with that this evening. But this is a book called Ember, a Tier 1 thriller by Andrews and Wilson. So you're apparently still on schedule, at least for July with Blackstone, right?
We're on a schedule.
Yeah. Right. So do you find that, with two of you, that you can be more productive? Does it mean that you can actually write more than one book a year and do what you think is a wonderful job?
Yes, I think that we sometimes maybe have bitten off more than we can chew, but as military guys, we have the ethos of adapt and overcome. So that's our mantra, adapt and overcome. But also, one of the really cool things about being a co-author is that you get to have this sort of force multiplier effect. That's another military-ism. But it's real for us because we were writing individually before we met, and we met at Thriller Fest, and we became friends first. But this military ethos of collaboration and teamwork, those aren't just like buzzwords. For us, that was what we lived. I mean, that was our life. And so, for example, like on a submarine, you can't take a submarine to sea with one dude. It's impossible. And in naval special warfare, you can't hit a compound and take an HVT off the X with one operator. So in fiction, we have big heroes, and they do a lot by themselves. In real life, in the military, it's teams of really brave men and women that collaborate and work as a team. And so we brought a lot of that experience, and it's already sort of woven in our DNA. So for us, it was very natural to team up. And so we're much, much more productive together than we were individually. And right now we're writing four series.
Only four?
Yeah, only four. We're underachievers. I want to say one other thing on that because I think that you hear that and it says, oh, that makes sense. But there is a stumbling block to it for a lot of people, and I think this is where the military part really kicks in, and that is ego, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Like we love to write. All writers love to write. We all love to be storytellers, and you build things and they're yours. And we can't do that if you're going to write together, because we literally write together. I know you know Kathy Coulter, and when she and JT Ellison were writing together, their model was a little different than ours. Like we literally write together. We split up chapters. We're writing simultaneously. And so there's an enormous amount of trust that has to go on. You have to know that he's got your back and that he's doing, you know, what the team and the mission need. And you have to get rid of ego, because everything he writes, I rewrite. And everything I write, he rewrites. But there's never a phone call that's like, hey, are you okay if I change this? Or are you okay if I change that? Whatever he does is he's going to do. And I think that that's probably the biggest stumbling block for some people to write together, is that sense of ownership. You want to own your little pearls, and you don't want someone to change them. But we don't have any of that.
Right. Well, I'm used to Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, who have a similar, which I've always really admired, because initially Lincoln Child was Doug's editor. And I've always thought that it said volumes for Lincoln and for Doug that they merged into partners.
It's hard to be friends with your editor.
Yeah, right. You know, but I mean that was a more I don't even know what word I want. I don't want to say patriarchal, but anyway, editor and author is a different structure than writing partners, but they have made it work. And over the years, there have been some really, I don't know if you guys ever knew or ever read books by a British spy author called Manning Coles, which were my all-time favorite books for forever. They wrote a book called A Toast to Tomorrow, where a British agent is in Germany and has something or other that, I think, an injury that gave him amnesia, and when he woke up, he was an official in the Nazi Party. But then he remembered he was British. And they're really funny, and they were absolutely wonderful. And then one of them died. And the other one couldn't go on, you know, because the voice had really was a man and a woman, interestingly, who were neighbors and friends. But when that one person went, the other person couldn't go on, you know, with a paired voice. So it'd be interesting if you ever split up. You're going to have to think about that.
I think one of the great compliments that we get, and it happens fairly regularly, which is why we can talk about it, is that people will email us, or you'll see it in our reviews. They'll say, well, I can't figure out who's writing which chapter. And the beautiful thing about that is, yeah, that's by design. You know, because of that system that Jeff was just explaining, there's an Andrews and Wilson voice that has emerged. We didn't expect it. We didn't plan for this. But if you read our solo works, which predate our joint works, so they're probably not as good just because we weren't as experienced
writers. Practicing. Yeah, you were practicing.
Yeah.
Warm up. Yeah, just stretching.
But they don't sound the same. The voice is different. And so we're very proud of the fact that there's this great Andrews and Wilson voice. And, you know, we kind of use, I mean, I think we're both dads, you know, and so, like, I would never say, like, you know, well, one daughter is my wife's kid and this other daughter is my kid. We don't split up our kids, right? So for us, we take the approach that each book is sort of like a child. And we're both, like, providing input and trying to turn that book to be the best possible book it can. So then when we release it in the world, it does its thing and people love it. And so there isn't ownership over, I wrote this line on page 147 and he wrote that. We just care, our pride of ownership is in the finished product.
Well, I think that this sounds like something you would just say when you're talking to people, like it's marketing, but this is true. There are times when even our wives will come and say, they read the book and they're like, oh yeah, chapter 14, that was you. And I swear, I don't know. Like, there are some, of course, that I know. But it is very common that, like, you wrote that? And I'm like, I don't know if I did. Like,
okay,
maybe I did.
So as a corollary question, though, when you're writing your Andrews and Wilson books for Blackstone, did you change your voice at all to write the Clancy? Did you feel like, you know, you needed I mean, you have to respect what Clancy had already done. You can't, like, you know, completely reimagine the characters and other things. But do you think your voice has changed a bit in the Clancys?
That's a great question, and you guys would probably be better suited to answer that than us, because I can say this. If that is true, and it could very well be, it wasn't intentional. So we didn't intentionally set out to change the voice at all. And Tom, and I know you've heard this from other people that write in the estate work, Tom is awesome at saying, look, don't try to be Clancy. respect the universe, respect the carries, respect the canon of the work, and carry it on. But write the best Andrews and Wilson book you can. But in this series, because we grew up on this series, like we were fans of these. I've read all of these books more than once. I've seen the movies. And so I do wonder, it's a great question, because I wonder if there is a difference in a voice between this book and an Andrews and Wilson book, just because that universe has been a part of our lives since before we were writing.
And also the characters, existed before you started writing them, and they had personalities and all of that. So you mentioned the 40th anniversary of the Hunt for Red October. So unsurprisingly, this is a submarine thriller. Whoa. And I was telling the guys, it's so interesting. I have actually been to all the places in Russia that they haven't been that they wrote about. I have been to Sebastopol
You're
to tour the
secret
Russian
spy.
Navy. I know. I've been to Murmansk, and I have spent a lot of time in St. Petersburg, and these are key scenes in the book. And I will say that I thought you wrote them very well. So is that a tribute to Google Maps and other stuff, or what?
Yeah, that's definitely a tribute to research, a variety of things. And we also had the opportunity to talk to people who, including some Russian expats, who could tell us a little bit more, not just about, the street and how it looks and smells and all that, but the culture and what it's like, so that we could capture that correctly.
Well, my trips to Russia were before the present unpleasantness. And I do think that it would probably be risky for either one of you as ex-military to actually go to Russia at this point. We just got our basketball player back, so how much worse, it would be for you. But anyway, tell us a little bit about the story, because I love the way it starts.
So one of the amazing things about Hunt for Red October, for all the Clancy fans know this, but for people who haven't read Clancy might not really just be aware of the impact that Hunt for Red October had. I mean, it really established this new genre, this military genre. And in particular, having been a submarine officer and a member of what we call the silent service, I came from a community that was conducting operations on a platform that nobody knew about, and so you had the Cold War, you had hundreds of submarines conducting missions that the average American really couldn't contemplate. And when Tom Clancy released the book, and President Ronald Reagan's, carrying it across the lawn, and it's photographed in his hand, people are like, oh, wow. Like, obviously, Reagan carrying it gives it authenticity, but Clancy did something else, too, which is he had access to the Navy. He reached out to the Navy, and he went on these trips where he would interact with the crews, he would go on the platforms, and he's known for providing all this rich detail about what it's like to be on a submarine. So now suddenly you have readers who are like, whoa, I didn't know what these things were like. And so that inspired me to join the Navy. I mean, it's ironic that here I am, decades later, I was reading Hunt for Red October on a submarine, following Russians around, reading about submarines chasing Russians around. So it was a pretty important thing for us when we thought about what is the purpose of this book, is to come back to that first book, capture the nostalgia, but update it to the modern era. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit, because that was I think the most challenging part that we had to be very intentional about, because you don't want to retread a book that everyone loves, right? Because that's a mistake. So finding that balance between having enough of the nostalgia that you remember that feeling of reading Hunt for the Red October, maybe putting a few Easter eggs, and you read it so you know where they are. You put those few Easter eggs that people are like, I remember that guy, right? A little bit of that, but you also have to frame it in a brand new story so that it'll be interesting and exciting and suspenseful, because we're writing thrillers. And at the same time, you have to update all of the geopolitics and the technology, which was very, very fun and exciting. And we couldn't have done any of those parts without the support of the Navy. The Navy was incredible. They engaged us, they embraced us, and they gave us a lot of access that helped with that.
I remember right, the Hunt for Red October was published by the Naval Institute. It was not actually published by a major publisher, but the Naval Institute itself put the book out, which gave it a kind of imprimatur that it was,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the coolest things that happened, and it was actually after everything was done and edited and all that, but we got to meet and get to know the last director of naval intelligence. We got to talk to Subland, who's this 3-star admiral in charge of the submarine force. We've met a lot of interesting people. But Admiral Trussler has taken on himself to introduce us to some of the most amazing people, which is good because we're still writing. Like the next book comes out in December. It's in edits now. So these people have been invaluable. But we actually got to meet the guy that was the first guy who read the book on active duty Navy while they were still vetting the book to be published. His name's Rich.
Exciting.
And he had some great, we won't share them here because it was confidential, but he had some great stories about, I'm not read this damn book. And then he was like, wow, this is really good. Can we really do this? And but it was fascinating to hear how that worked. And you mentioned Naval Institute Press. This was the very first fiction book that they had ever published. And they did a few after that, and then they never did it again. And so there's a lot of, like, if you think about what are the odds that, because he had submitted this book, he couldn't get it published. He was having trouble finding a place. Naval Institute Press said, we'll do it. Ronald Reagan read it, walked across the lawn with it, and it became an enormous bestseller. And then a few years later, Naval Institute Press said, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. So talk about, like, the stars lining up, right? It's just incredible.
It really did. Well, I don't think they were prepared to support a bestseller. It takes an incredible amount of money and all the rest of it. And so while they made a lot, it would still not be. But so have you guys, I know you have been, I grew up in Chicago, and at some point, the Museum of Science and Industry, which my husband's great-grandfather actually built, it was called the Rosenwald Museum when I was a child, but he took his name off it, or wanted his name taken off it. They brought a German sub down the St. Lawrence Seaway and through the Great Lakes, and they put it outside the Museum of Science and Industry so that people could go into it. And I remember going into it, and it was so claustrophobic that I just couldn't even imagine. You talk about the principal sub in this book, the Russian sub is enormous, but this little guy, was, and I thought, how in the world did people actually stay together in this little tin can under the water? They couldn't really have been bathing. They couldn't, there are a lot of things that went by the board for sure. And I wonder how many people have any of you been in a sub? Have you, sir? Yeah, well, you're tall, so you would. But I thought it was an amazing experience to go in it, and I was so impressed by the kind of person. And I understood that because of all the confinement and all that, there's serious psychological tests, at least then, that you have to take. Are they still? No, I'm really serious, because it's so confined and so whatever. Did you pass through a series of tests?
So it's interesting. They do an assessment to see if you, it's a psychological assessment to see if you feel like you could do this type of job. Obviously asking questions about claustrophobia and the like. But you could conceivably lie on the assessment, but then you would end up on a submarine. So there's no incentive to do that. But what I like about the submarine in the stories is that it's sort of the ultimate microcosm, right? So when you think about world building, we're transporting you to a machine that 100+ people live inside. It's powered by a nuclear reactor. It's driving around at hundreds of feet underwater. There are no windows. It's not like a tourist submarine. You can't see where you're going, and you're navigating in the dark by sound and dead reckoning and some other technologies that we have to keep track of where we are. But it really is like being transported to a crazy other world. And so that's something that we feel like as authors is probably our primary job, right? We're giving our readers an opportunity to live a life and be in the shoes of somebody doing a job that they would never have access to in their everyday life.
Right. So it's sort of a modern Jules Verne is,
Exactly.
what it comes down to. So in your opening, not quite opening, but second chapter, if I remember right, the sub is going to be moving out from its base, which is north of Murmansk, which is, it's on the Arctic. During World War II, this was actually, if I remember right, it was actually a base, but because the Northern Sea over Russia was still so frozen, the climate was such that it was only open for very little. But now people are short-circuiting the canal and the the Suez and the Panama and all the rest of it by starting to sail across the top of the world. But anyway, you have your big sub moving out, and there's a scary maneuver there because there's a very, very narrow entrance to this harbor, and the commander of the ship wants to teach his staff a lesson. I knew that he wouldn't actually sink it, because otherwise the whole book would go down, underwater. But did you have experience as a submariner actually?
So that scene was just based on the stress of taking a giant, submarine out of the harbor. A submarine is a deep draft vessel. Most people don't realize it because you can't see it. It looks like a tiny, from a radar cross section, it presents as almost like a fishing boat because all you're getting a radar return is on the sail. But the huge circumference of the hull is underwater, so it's a deep draft vessel, and they do not turn on a dime. They're not made to maneuver on the surface, and so a decision that you make, if you're a minute too late or 30 seconds too late to give your rudder order, you might run into something. You might not make the turn. So that's something that every young junior officer is being trained by their captain, how to maneuver the big submarine out of the harbor safely.
And that particular chapter, we put it where we did very early in the book for two reasons. One, we wanted to introduce the character, as you saw, and get a little bit of insight as to him as a captain, and his leadership and command style. But also, we wanted from the very beginning for the reader to say, okay, this is going to be a journey where I'm going to go on this journey. We wanted people to feel like they were aboard that submarine, standing in the right on the watch, as this thing might slam into it, right? So that was very intentional to put it early so that the reader would very early say, okay, it's this kind of book. I'm going to be on this journey. I'm going to be that tick on a hound kind of story. That's where we're going.
But on the opening chapter, you actually have dropped back in time, to slightly before the hunt for Red October. So tell us about that, because that's key. And you name a character in the opening chapter who then appears in the next chapter, and you realize that there's a connection.
Yeah, and without spoiling it too much, we don't give away too much, but we did want to, one of the challenges, like I said earlier, was to find the nostalgia and find the link between Hunt for the Red October and this book. And we came up with an idea that we were pretty proud of how to link that. So in the opening chapter, it's not giving away too much to say that at about the time that Ramius is stealing the Red October to turn over to the Americans, an engineer that was involved in that, in the development of the Hunt for the or of the Red October, is simultaneously trying to sell those secrets to the Americans to get his family out of Russia and to America. But because they already have the Red October, they don't need him. And so that creates some stress. And the skipper of the Russian boat is his son, who remembers this incident. So I don't want to give away more than that.
But it might have been a totally different Constantine, but nonetheless, we do sort
Could
of
have
guess
been.
that
Could have been,
we
right.
do sort of guess that it's probably the same Constantine. But actually, I think my memories at fault here. The opening chapter is really Jack Ryan and his family gathering around a dinner table. So there are like three openers there.
Yeah, so family is important, and especially with the Ryan family, right? So you have sort of the ultimate hero family for America. President Jack Ryan, he's started as an analyst in the CIA, and then he is now in the canon of the books. He's the president of the United States. So when we inherited the canon, right? So we inherited all the previous stories that came before the book that we're writing. And so one of the interesting and exciting challenges for us was, all right, we know we can't have the president, fast roping into a hot LZ, or he can't be doing a helicopter drop onto another submarine. We can't do that. He's got to be in the Oval Office. So how do we capture that original element of, okay, I'm just an analyst, but I've got to solve this problem, and I have to go in the field, and Jack Ryan is physically engaging with Ramius. That was what made it so visceral and so fun. And so we said, well, Jack Ryan Jr. has his own series, so we can't do Jack Ryan Jr. But there are some other Ryan kids that were born.
Three
and
more,
Three
actually.
more.
Yeah.
And
And one's a
Sally's
doctor, so
one's a
that's going to be
doctor.
hard to work out. Right.
Yeah, so our solution was
Yeah, our solution was Katie and Kyle. So the last time you hear about them is many books ago when she was just a little girl and was almost kidnapped, right? So by terrorists. So we really haven't heard anything in the books since about where they ended up, either of these two kids. And I just want to say, preface what I'm going to tell you about Katie with this. That element of Jack Ryan, that young Jack Ryan CIA analyst, not just a dog with a bone that was super smart and solved the problem, but that fish out of water element, like I'm just an analyst, he had no business being there. He had no business being on board the carrier. He had no business being on board a submarine, but if he hadn't been there, right, it all would have ended differently. That was my favorite part of the early books, that element. Because you could relate to him. You're like, yeah, I could be that. Like, okay, yeah, I'm also not qualified to be on a submarine, but if I had to be to save the world, could I do it, right? And I loved that. And like Brian said, well, we can't have Jack go back out there. So how do we do that? So Katie, fast forward to this book, we decided, well, we can recapture that because now Katie and Kyle are old enough that they must have careers. So in our interpretation of this, Katie and Kyle both attended the United States Naval Academy. And Katie has gone into naval intelligence, probably not even consciously following in her father's footsteps. And so she is not CIA, but naval intelligence. She did a tour in the fleet like you would do, and now she's at ONI. And she and her lead IS, intelligence specialist, are the ones that stumble onto this submarine and start to say, what's going on? And so that was our way that we could recapture that element. It was really important to be able to find that way. And that's what we came
I
up
thought about her because I've actually been to Annapolis, not as an undergraduate, but as a tourist. And you can tour the Naval Academy. I mean, it's not all closed down. And I was doing great until we went to the swim. But I would have called it the natatorium because that's what we called it when I was a kid. And in order to graduate, you have to be willing to go off. How high is the damn thing? It's like 100 feet high or something. Anyway.
It looks under, it's 15 meters.
Whatever it is. And I thought that right there, I'm washing out. You know, there is no way I'm going up there and stepping. And we watched a cadet go up there and then really couldn't quite decide, you know, what to do. So I do think, I mean, it's a beautiful campus. I think it's really, I have a cap with Annapolis, and I wear it when I travel a lot, like a baseball cap. People are always saying, oh, Annapolis, did you grad? No, I said, I was just a tourist. But, you know, it gives me a lot of...
I eat oysters there.
It's really, you know, it's inspiring to go to, this is where George Washington handed back his command in Annapolis. It's really inspiring when you look at our current political life to recognize there was there was a guy who could have chosen to be king, and he could have chosen to stay, you know, in charge of the army, and instead, you know, he assembled everybody and he handed back his command, which I think was a remarkable, and I only wish it were being emulated currently. But still, Annapolis is a terrific place. So if these two kids went through it, then they would have been molded by that, right?
yes.
Yeah, 100%. You know, in the original books, in the movies, they say that Jack Ryan went to the Naval Academy. But in the books, that's actually not the case. So in the books,
He wouldn't have if he was an analyst. There
Yeah.
wasn't any reason for him to go to Annapolis.
but he was a Marine. He did
He would have been
serve.
at what is it, Paris Island?
No. The Naval Academy is where you get Marine officers also.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
They have the whole thing there, don't
Yes,
they? They
that's
even
correct.
eat separately. Now that I think
So
about
a
it,
certain percentage of the Academy graduates will go.
you're right.
Marines.
When they muster, the Marines are over here and the Navy
So in
guys
the-
are over
so
here.
in the
I
books,
forgot.
he was a Marine, and in the movie, he was an Academy guy. But we stayed true to the canon of the books. We don't mention anything about that. But we did have them go to the Academy. So
Excellent move. So a misconception that we talked about at dinner was that the TV, the Jack Ryan TV, many of us, including me for a moment anyway, thought that it was Jack Ryan Jr., but it's actually not. It's Jack Ryan Sr. as a CIA guy. And the seeds of what he's going to become are definitely planted there. But I think that's a good reminder because the youth factor probably means that most people think it's Jack Ryan Jr., but it's really not, is it?
That's right. And it plays into some of the difficulty and the strategizing we thought about writing this book, which is Jack Ryan is iconic. He's been around a long time, but he's also been portrayed by Chris Pine, Alec Baldwin, Harrison Ford, Ben Affleck, and now John Krasinski.
And reimagined by Krasinski. Like that's a complete reboot, reimagination of who he was.
Every movie, it's a sort of a reimagining of these stories. The TV show is a complete reboot. And if you think about The Hunt for Red October, the movie really is what burns the brightest in most people's memories. And there's some significant differences between what happened in the movie and what happened in the book. And so you remember certain things, because our memories are imperfect, you remember certain things, oh, that happened in the book. No, it didn't. So, but what we wanted to do is try to play to both camps, and because we're fans of the book and the movie, and so there are some Easter eggs in Act of Defiance that play to the film and to the book, and so we were very strategic about that. I'm sure some people will grumble, they're like, "Well, that never happened in the book." We know. We know.
Good point. And I think your title is a really good one, you know, I mean, because that really is what this is about. Defiance, right?
100%, yeah.
Right. So, what did you enjoy most about writing it?
Oh my gosh. So I will be honest, I went into it overwhelmed because we had so much going on. So I went into it with a little bit of a bad attitude. I'm going to admit that freely. You did not. I did. But the moment we wrote the first chapter, I was like just transported back to all of my own nostalgia of reading the books. So I think that there's not like a particular chapter that was my favorite or anything like that. It was the idea of feeling like while we were writing it, was also transported back to all that memory of emotion of reading it the first time and seeing the film the first time, and to be part of that universe that had such a profound impact on me now as a writer, but then as someone who decided to pursue a naval career. That was my favorite part. It was not a particular element of the writing. It was that whole just transporting me back. What about you?
For me, it was the opportunity to sort of reconnect with my community. So this is sort of an opportunity for me to brag on my community, because when we reached out to the Navy, one of the things that they did is they assigned a subject matter expert who's an active duty commander. He's a lieutenant commander, Dennis Guy, and he was our guy. Guy was our guy. And so what was so exciting is we got to, as a team, we got to re-engage the community, but these were my people. You know, this is what I used to do. And so the Navy was like, do you guys want to go out on a Virginia-class submarine and go underway? We're like, really? Yeah. Can we do that? Yes, please. And so I served on a Los Angeles-class submarine. It was built in 1986, the USS Louisville. It was Fairwater planes. It's just like the one that you see in the movie Hunt for Red October. That's the Dallas that's chasing around the Red October. But the Virginia-class submarine is the next generation of submarine. So now you have so much more automation and technology and a different design and a whole new generation of submariners. And so we got to go out. When I was in, it was an all-male service. But now it's integrated. So there are women submarine officers, women submarine crew. And so we went underway on the USS Indiana, and it is a mixed crew. We toured the Blackfish, USS Washington. It's a mixed crew. We talked to female submariners. Mm-hmm. And so we had a chance to engage with the people that are doing this right now. It's really cool.
I love it. I bet the design incorporates showers.
Yeah, right. Well, and I want to
yes,
say,
Barbara,
yes, I know. I really thought about that.
I want to say, add to what he's talking about with this engagement of the Navy, because it was really cool to see the technology. We got to fly out. They flew us out. Brian got his very first carrier landing in a COD aboard the newest aircraft carrier, the Gerald R. Ford. We got to meet with those people. We got to fly F-18 simulators with VFA 106 pilots. We did the submarine stuff. And that was all so cool. It really was. But it wasn't my favorite part. What was really cool was the people. It was meeting with the submariners. It was sitting with the crew from E1 to 3-star admirals. We sat and talked, and we had the opportunity to say, look, we're writing this book. How do you want us to tell your story? How do you want us to represent your community to people who have no idea what you do that you can be proud of? And I think that was really cool.
100%.
Wow, so the power of storytelling is just amazing. So to write a thriller, you really have to have a protagonist and an antagonist. You know, you can't just have two nice guys bumping along. And if you have all bad guys, who cares? So how did you, I mean, you had a template. If you were going to rewrite basically or honor the Hunt for Red October, you pretty much had a template for who the good guys and the bad guys would be, right?
Yeah, so we have a template for who are the good guys and the bad guys. We need a bad guy submarine captain, right? And we need our analysts and all that.
Well, he's pretty much going to have to be Russian
Yeah,
if you're really going to do this.
He's going to have to. If we're really going to do it, it's going to have to be Russian. So from a geopolitical standpoint, we were probably a little bit married to that. But I will say that the Andrews and Wilson brand in general, I think one of the things that we're the most proud of, well, the big thing is that we get to honor people that we serve with. But very close second is, as on the creative side, we give more life to our antagonists than I think most people do. We really develop them to the point where in some of our series, a particular antagonist might take 3 books to really resolve the conflict with them. We give them families, and we try to remember that they're the good guys in their story. But that's a little bit of a balancing act, because if you go too far, you don't want to make them so sympathetic that you hate it when, you know, John Dempsey comes in and caps him. So you do have to find a little bit of a balance.
Bluntly, right?
But so you got to find a balance. But it is a richer story if you give them a life and motive.
Here's a mantra to keep in mind. The very best books are when you admire the hero, you mourn the victim, and you empathize with the villain.
Right.
And I've always thought those made the very best, you know, mysteries and therefore thrillers as well. I mean, you know, you don't want them to be cardboard characters. You do want them to be people that you have their own story. And even if they're ultimately going to be vanquished, so your guy can live to fight another day. I mean, you know, that's the one thing we know in a series is that Jack is going to survive the book, okay? So that's the part that, you know, you have to overcome. If you were writing standalones, you can decimate everyone in the book, right? But you can't do that if you're going to write Jack Ryan.
And you very astutely picked up on that in that very first chapter, that prologue, we're really laying the foundation for why is Konstantin Gorov the man that he is.
Right.
And, you know, you're going to have some empathy now that you know his backstory. But when Red October starts, you don't know what Ramius is doing. Jack Ryan is the guy that says he's going to defect, but nobody's sure. I mean, he's gone rogue. And so we knew we couldn't repeat and I'm going to stop before we give a spoiler, but we knew we couldn't repeat that. It couldn't be the exact same story. So Konstantin Gorov has to have different motivations, and it has to play out a little differently than it did in the first book. So we're pretty proud of how we handled it.
It did work out. And, you know, this isn't really a spoiler, but you do give him a serious physical handicap. And I'm trying to remember, what is it exactly that he's suffering from? Is it like pancreatic cancer? Is that pretty much what it is? I mean, because we see him in the whole book that he is in pain. So right from the beginning, you recognize that. But what isn't one of you a doctor? Do I remember that? Do you have medical?
Is that you?
We're
one person
one
now.
of
we
us
have,
has operated on people.
Yeah, I was a.
Not
It
me.
was you,
Yeah,
wasn't
it was
it?
me.
Yeah, no, I thought so. I remember from our, you know, from our
Hopefully the
Zoom
doctor was the
conversation.
one doing
you're
the
not
No,
operating.
he was almost in scrubs when we were on Zoom, and so I think I remember that you were the medical guy. But I did think one way that we really empathized with him was your depictions of the true agony that he is in. You know, physical agony that he is in.
And then he wants to make it through that to do this other thing that he needs
Yeah,
to do.
so it's good to have medical background. So you've had this Red October to kick off this thing. Are you going to try to be faithful to any of the, or be inspired by, let me put it that way, any of the other Clancy stories? Or are you just going to go off on your own at this point? You're not obliged to write or to pay homage to anything else.
I mean, I love the question. There's a lot of material too,
Mm-hmm.
and geopolitically things have evolved a lot. I will say, and I don't think it's a spoiler, Jeff might correct me, but
It'll be too late.
It'll be too late.
That's true.
He can deny. You can deny. Deny. The next book is Defense Protocol. We've turned it in. We're very proud of it. Comes out in December. And there's a nod to Rainbow Six in that book. Yeah.
Not a big nod. It's definitely not an homage like this was.
Yeah.
But there is a little nod.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to consistently rewrite the Clancys or be inspired by them, and God knows there's plenty of stuff that you can take after. Do you think that the TV in any way is going to either shape your audience or shape stories that you might want to write, or do you just ignore it and leave it out there?
I mean, I don't think it's ignore it so much as just accepting that they're sort of two different universes.
Right.
You know, if you watch that show, and I love John Krasinski's take on Jack Ryan, but that's what it is.
I did like him. I didn't love the Venezuelan one. The second one was not my favorite.
Wasn't as good.
No.
You're not alone in that.
Yeah, you're not. Yeah.
Okay.
But so loved it. But we're going to stay true to Tom Clancy's characters. So that's what we're going to do in all of them. The Clancy universe is Tom's universe, and it's an enormous honor to be able to carry it on. So we want to honor that. So
wouldn't it be surreal if they make a movie of one of your books?
Wouldn't it?
It would be. I know. Well, more news on that to come probably as we move along here. How about questions? Since you guys have come from California and you're serious fans, what would you like to ask?
You know we have email. You didn't have.
I don't know. I'm just enjoying this. I read the sandbox.
Yay.
After that email, AI took off topic. But no, you answered one of our questions, how you work together. Because Sandra and us, we were wondering how that worked out. So now, so you work separate when you come together. So when you say you work together, how much do you get in the same room? I guess that's it.
Never, because we live 1,000 miles apart.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh,
So he's in Tornado Alley, and I'm down in Florida. So yeah, it's
Hurricane Alley, as it all happens.
Right.
Don't sound so smug about
Look,
tornado.
we got all the weather covered. So there's never sitting in a room. If we're together, we're with Barbara, or we're like at Thriller Fest or something like that. So yeah, no. I understand. So but you can't. This sounds impossible, but we also don't outline. So we do have to communicate quite a bit. So in the middle of a book, it's not unusual for us to be on the phone 5, 6, 7, even 8 times a day.
The phone works better than Zoom, for example?
Yeah, because when we're on Zoom, we screw around. We don't. We get nothing done. It's
He's a pacer, so he walks and he talks, right? So Zoom, I wouldn't see you. You'd be.
yeah. I walk
Well,
around.
I'd see
the
you.
room,
Yeah,
right?
it'd be like an
Every
orbiting.
now and then I
Yeah.
say- and he complains all the time because I walk around on my lanai because that's where I work. I sit outside because
Part of that orbit, there's no reception.
And there's this one little corner. So I have to time what I'm going to say so that when I'm passing there, it didn't matter.
You probably go there when I'm talking.
All the time.
Yeah.
So, but digital transfer, I mean, it's easy enough to just pass, stuff back and forth. So do you open a document and write on it, how does, because you can share a document.
No, we don't do that.
Yeah.
I think that would be, and I know people that do that. But first of all, it would be very difficult to do it that way because we have to write a book every 3.5 months. So we have to be writing at the same time.
Yeah.
Like he can't write and I can write in the same document. So I'm writing a chapter while he's writing a whole different chapter.
Yeah.
And so once we get every 2 or 3 chapters done, we swap them and I rewrite his and he rewrites mine. And then they go into a master file. One advantage of that, by the way, just from the craft point of view, if anyone's interested in that, is obviously it's fast, which we contractually have to do. But it's also a very efficient way to get a very clean first draft manuscript. Because if you think about it, we've actually been through one complete edit by the time, right? Because we're cleaning each other's work up as we go. And as we blend things, there's that another opportunity. So by the time we get to the end of our rough draft manuscript is probably more like a first pass DE by the time we're done. So that's efficient also.
Does it shorten up as you write? Because, the truth is, I've always believed in this saying, and I don't remember who I should give credit to, but basically the saying is, I would have written shorter if I'd had more time. And I find that to be tremendously true. And so do you find that in the revision it gets smaller?
We always have
Tighter?
Yes, we always have a page count reduction, mainly because, you know, our process is, all right, what's the boring parts? Let's cut those out. Okay,
You
what
want to
can
cut out the words that readers skip in the immortal words of
Exactly.
And then
Elmore Leonard.
redundancy.
yeah, cut out redundancy, cut out the, you know, and a lot of that second pass is, okay, we said this in 3 paragraphs, we could say it in 1, you know. And I think that the modern reader has changed. There's been an evolution of the thriller fan from when Clancy was writing the books. I don't believe that people have the patience to sit down and read the type of narration that you had back in the original Ludlum and maybe the original Clancy. You have a nostalgia for it. You remember loving it, but I think today's readers want a little more fast pace.
I think that's a really good point. I actually went back and read a Ludlum book a few years ago. We were on vacation. I'm going to reread this. It was one of my favorite books. I won't say which one. But it was a big, heavy book, and there were literally 6 pages of action. And I loved the book, but it wasn't how I remembered it. Like, it was, you know, and you can't, the modern reader will not accept that.
Well, people have shorter attention spans
They do.
now, thanks to the digital age and more leisure time to read. So I think that reading time for many of us has been fractured by other things. One thing I find really annoying, and I do it myself, I did it with your book because I wanted to see what, you know, pulley or whatever it is that when I come across something, I'll pick up my phone and I will go look to see, you know, for the map or some explanation of, so, you know, for a little while when I was reading, you know, the exit chapter, I'm looking at the harbor, you know, and imagining the whole thing. So that interrupts the flow in a way. And, you know, you wouldn't have done that before you had a phone. You know, you just read it and thought,
you had to
I
drive
wonder
to
what
the
that place is really like. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, we do read differently. That's absolutely true. I wish that we could go back, but I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a trend back to bigger books now. Much larger books are A Covenant of Water, the Verghese, is an enormous book, which I absolutely loved. There's one just coming out called The Familiaris that your publisher, in fact, is getting autographed for me by the author. And it's huge. We're the Outlander bookstore, so we know, for example, that one carton of Outlander weighs 32 pounds.
Whoa.
Because we deal with them in, you know, in their hundreds. And so we all, it's like working in a gym. When Diana writes a new book, we all develop, you know, extra muscles. So there are people who are enchanted to read really long books, and they're making kind of a comeback.
This book is our longest book.
It's definitely a big book.
Yeah.
You just look at it,
Yeah.
you know, you can see, look at the...
Well, the one's like 128,000, I think, somewhere around there.
130.
130.
Yeah, which is on the high side.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
thrillers
nowadays-
tend to
nowadays
run.
it is, for sure.
Thrillers tend to run somewhere around 100 to 110 most of the time.
We're
a lot of mysteries.
We're a little verbose. Ours
Yeah.
tend to be a
well,
little.
it's a big. It's
the
a,
tier 1 tends to, the tier 1 books tend to be around 400 pages, and this one's over 500. So we had the luxury of saying, oh, Clancy books are bigger. The audience
Sure.
expects a bigger book, so we don't have to be quite as tight. And there was a lot of stuff happening in this book too. So
yeah, no, it moves very, very quickly. So it isn't like you're bogged down in the size. But you know, publishers also pay attention to how much paper it takes to print a book, and if it's a really long book, it becomes a more expensive book. And so
If you're a debut author, don't turn a 500-page
no,
book in.
you really don't want to do that. And so, you know, a price adjustment might be needed. So you do have, there's a lot of things you have to think about. So have you also, many authors today are using their websites for extra material, research notes or, you know, stuff like that. Have you thought about doing any of that yet?
we post pictures from our trips on there. We have a fan wall where we post pictures of fans with our books or funny things they send us. We ask for our readers to send us stories about themselves and their military backgrounds and what they like about our books. So we collect those. We have drink recipes
Yeah.
on the website.
Yeah, thanks to John Rich, our friend John Rich. But, I know what you're talking about, and I enjoy those. By the way, I go to those websites of some of our colleagues and read those because I enjoy them. Our problem is, and I don't want this to sound whiny because we're so blessed that we're doing what we're doing.
You just
but
don't
if you're
have
gonna
enough
write
time.
a book every 3.5 months, I don't know when we would have time to post our research notes. So it's really more a
I keep
logistical
telling
issue.
you that people are in your future.
I know.
You know, there's no way that you
But
can
we're
do
control
this.
freaks.
We did post the pictures from the USS Ford when we were underway. We were standing on the flight deck. So there's pictures of us.
There's
and
some video too,
There's
right?
videos of F-18s
Hornets
taking
off and
yeah.
recovering.
So we'll do that. We do that. It's kind of fun.
That's research notes, sort of.
What really-
Modern age.
Historical fiction, you know, is one of those things where it's a tough decision about how much of the history to leave in, how much of the research, and a lot of it comes out. But then many authors don't want it to be gone away forever, so they post their notes and other things, you know, in a way that people who really want to do a deep dive into it can go do that.
Oh, then why would people come to the Andrews and Wilson Museum in 25 years?
Boy, these guys are strategic thinkers, aren't they? Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So if you guys don't have an outline when you guys are passing it back and forth, when you get a paragraph or a chapter the other guy wrote, you're like, where the heck did this come from? And then where do I go from here? Like, how do you-
Yeah, that's a good question. So I say we don't outline, and we don't. Like, we don't outline, the entire book, but we sort of verbally outline in little chunks. So at any given time, we know where the next 5 or 6 chapters are going. And really, by the time you get a few chapters in, you know where that whole, we write in a 3-act structure. So you know where Act 1 is going to start and basically where it's going to finish. And so there's not no outline. So if you look at our outline, it says Chapter 7, Brian, Dempsey POV, and then it'll be like one sentence of what's basically supposed to happen in that chapter. But that's a reminder of the verbal outline that we did because we've hashed it out and we know what needs to happen in there, and I know what basically he's going to do. And one of the reasons that we have so many phone calls is because we don't like to lock ourselves into an outline. Brian might get into that chapter, as he often does, and halfway through go, oh, I have a better idea. And so if he does that, though, once he commits to it, the very next thing he does is takes a break, calls me and says, hey, just so you know, I'm going to do this instead so that we don't run into that. Because early on we had more of that, had to deconflict things. And so now we're good about keeping each other informed. So I say there's no outline, and there isn't, but there's definitely a verbal agreement about what's going on.
And there's only been one time in 24 books that we wrote the same chapter. Yeah. So
Mine was better.
You weren't supposed to write that chapter.
It just needed to be done.
Yeah. So that's that we give each other our marching orders, and so then we'll say, all right, I know he's writing this, so I'm writing that.
I forgot about that. That
Yeah,
was
it's funny.
awful. I felt so bad.
That's funny.
For me, because I had wasted
You
my
wasted
time.
your time. Yeah, and that was one where I was like, I'm sorry you did that, bro, but like mine's the primary. So we'll look at yours, and if there's some good ideas, we'll put them in mine. But
Is this an example of the lack of ego you were talking about?
yeah.
Right.
No ego in that decision.
There has to be all the way around. Does anybody else, any of you over here have a question you'd like to ask?
I don't have a question, but I only knew one person that ever worked on a submarine.
Yeah.
And we were at a church dinner, and everybody's lining up, to get the barbecue and stuff, and this guy's over here pacing around. And I said, if you want to go ahead of me, go ahead. He said, no, I was on a submarine, and we don't line up. I will not get in a line.
Really?
Yeah, he said it was just physically impossible for him mentally to get in a line and wait there.
That's interesting. They got to line up for chow now.
Interesting. Patrick, from your perch in the back there, do you have any questions from the virtual audience you want to share through the wall? It's so funny when he does that. It's like the bookcase speaks.
The wall is talking to us, and I hear the fingers.
You've answered most of the ones that they've asked.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm just interested in how you work out writing together and some of the things you've been talking about.
It's always of interest when you have two authors People always want to know how you don't kill each other while you're working together.
By living 1,000 miles apart.
That helps. That's really true. Manning Coles, the ones I spoke about earlier, they were next door neighbors. And I've often wondered did they do it over the hedge? I mean, they were very British.
Stand at the fence. I like that.
Right. No, it's wonderful. So, yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Sorry. So you said that you work 4 or 5 chapters ahead, but you must have an idea for the whole book.
We do, but it never turns out that way. And I'm being serious. And you've heard of pantsers and plotters, and it's kind of a gimmicky phrase, but we truly do. We have an arc for the book when we sit down because you start with an idea. Well, what could that be, and then you go. But I would say less than 20% of the time does the book end the way we think it might when we start.
And how long do you give yourselves to do that brainstorming?
We start like when that book is going to start. We start that Monday, and we're writing by Wednesday.
Yeah.
And
But the first couple weeks are really busy because you're still imagining it, right?
Yeah, and there's changes and there's sometimes some redirects and stuff. But one of the things that's interesting about both of our brains is that we don't really even know when we start the chapter what the characters are going to do, and we're similar in this respect. So the characters dictate sort of what's going to happen, and we get surprised. We'll call each other up and be like, dude, I didn't think this was going to happen, but so-and-so did this, and he's like, oh,
guess what Dempsey did?
Yeah. And so, honestly, I think for me at least, and you can you can say your opinion on this, but that keeps it really interesting because it's almost like I'm getting to enjoy the story unfolding. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's like binge watching a series. It's like I want to write today so I find out what happens.
Find out what happens.
Right.
I like how you said that.
Yeah,
it's like,
I mean, I do.
We're gonna write so we can find out what happens.
So we find out what happens,
Yeah.
and I do feel that way sometimes. So definitely.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing about the writing that we didn't hit on, usually somebody asks, is how we deal with conflict. And I bring it up only because it sounds ridiculous, but we really don't have any conflict. For one thing, at this point, 27 or 8 books or whatever it is, we sort of have one brain. I can't tell you how many times I'll call him up and say, I've got a great idea, and I say it, and he's like, yeah, I wrote that. Or vice versa. It's like, he'll be, guess what we should do? I'm like, let me guess. And I say it, and he goes, yeah, that's what I was going to say. So there's that. But the other thing is that back to the military thing and the no ego, it really is part of it. Like on the very rare occasion, there's been maybe 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, tell him our rule. What's our rule?
Yeah, our rule is that if I say, I think we should do this, and he says, I don't know, I think maybe we should go this way. We'll talk about it back with pros and cons of the two, and then we decide which of us really feels the most strongly about it.
I'm so glad you said that. My husband and I have been married for 34 years in December.
And that's how you do it.
Well, our rule is he who cares the most gets to win.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you're saying. But
And that is what we're saying.
it is almost 100% of the time clear which one of you cares more, which one of you is more invested in the outcome.
Yeah.
And
that comes back to the trust in marriage too, right?
Yeah.
It's just like this is a partnership. And so just like in your marriage, there's that trust. If you feel that strongly about it, I trust there's a reason for that. And I don't think, and the other thing is that we're writing a book. We're not making life and death situations in a marriage or in a military operation. So if we're wrong, we can change it. Like you can always go back, but we never have. When we have used that rule and said, okay, you feel more strongly, let's go your way, it's always the right way. And we haven't had to change anything so far.
We'd had previous practice, so we knew that, that it was important that we arrive at conflict resolution before it all started. But Patrick has witnessed. Rob and I don't fight, do we? We disagree. Come on, Patrick. We disagree. Yeah.
You got him where you wanted him.
Oh, that's not true. That's not even fair. No, you'd be surprised. No, I mean,
I just wanted to ask them about, this trend in, Andrews and Wilson, Preston and Child. What happened to your first names, and are you happy with that?
that's a great question.
Well, I think part of it was we've sort of played around with this phonetics of it and the sound, and then with A first, you get higher on the alphabetical order listing, right?
And it sounds like a root beer.
It sounds like a root beer. So I think for us, I mean, we spent some time thinking about pros and cons and branding, and this is where we ended up.
Yeah. It really was a branding thing more than, how does it look on a cover? How does it sound? I mean, it wasn't unintentional. We don't mean to make it sound that way. But it came down to branding more than whose name goes where. And it is cleaner, right? It rolls off the tongue. Andrews and Wilson, rather than Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson. That's a little.
Or even Wilson and Andrews. It's a different rhythm.
Different rhythm.
Yeah.
It would be better. We'd
Oh.
sell way more books.
I've always thought that Doug got the lead because he was the published author first. So Preston and Child I think it was because Doug was Lincoln was the editor and Doug was the author. So it was just sort of natural for it to go that way.
Wasn't Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child for a while, wasn't it? Before they switched to just Preston.
I think you're right.
I think so.
I think there were a couple
And
books.
here's part of that, and this is really funny. But if you pay any attention to how books are packaged, when it's the first book, the title. I mean, because we do tons of debuts. When you get in a first novel, the title is very large, and the author's name is small because nobody knows who the author is and nobody cares. So, basically, like the book I gave away last night, The Hunters, whatever, Nicholas Salvinic, her name is small and the title is big. If it is successful, pretty soon the title really shrinks and the author's name goes up. And first novels, people come into the store or the first couple and they will ask for the book by title. And now, Patrick and I can tell you that nobody pays any attention to the titles at this point. They say, I want the next Lee Child, or occasionally the Jack Reacher, or I want the new Ann Perry, or and so the name becomes a brand, and therefore the name, notice the size of Tom Clancy.
Yeah,
here.
I was going to say, and
The
if you write a Clancy book, you have this,
Exactly.
and then if you
So,
can you
Look
see?
at the side. We're much bigger on the side.
Right.
Oh, wait. No, we're not. No, we're not.
so consequently, having the first names in just takes up too much space on the book. And
We are a
so-
big deal because on our books,
Right.
it's at the top.
All right. So let's give away the book. So you should have a number. Did PK, you did give away a few numbers, PK? 5. All right. So you want to duel over which one of you is going to pick the winning number?
What
We're gonna
one
pick
through
a
what?
number 1 through 5, and we're going
Number
to
1 through
winner is going to go home with Ember
3.
3. That was decisive. Is that you, sir? All right. Here you are. You could even get it autographed while you're here.
Now, that's the advanced reader copy. We changed the ending from what's in that. So, just kidding.
And the characters.
Yeah, just kidding. Just kidding.
And the story.
I feel very fortunate that I do get
copy.
regular advanced reading copies from their publisher, and it'll be even more frequent now. Shows up all the time. So thank you very much for coming out this evening. Let's give our authors a big round of applause. Yay!
And thank you for
Virtual-
the great questions, Barbara.
Oh, well, I thought the audience questions were by far superior. Thank you, virtual audience, for watching. We appreciate it. If you go home and you've had a good time, you could tag Poison Pen as well as the authors on your social media. I'm giving them lessons in social media here. How it goes. You probably know more than I do, but nonetheless, it's a really good idea to know how to do all that.
I think we're going to turn it over to our